In today's video, we're going to talk about accessories, but also settings for Fujifilm X-T5 for photography. And if you want to know how I set up my Fujifilm X-T5 for videography, then make sure to subscribe because I will produce another video for that. So first, let's talk about the accessories that I recommend. And there are not a lot of them because I think that you should keep that setup pretty light, especially for photography. The first accessory that I would recommend is a Peak Design wrist strap. I think that the Peak Design wrist strap goes perfectly well with the form factor of the X-T5 and allows you to have some mobility with the X-T5 while keeping it safe when you're shooting. Now, if you're not a wrist strap kind of guy, but you prefer the shoulder one, then you can also opt for a Peak Design compatible one. You can just set attach on both sides of your camera and switch from the wrist strap to the neck strap whenever you want. The second accessory that I would recommend is a shutter button release. Now, while I enjoy the shutter button of the X-T4 or X-T5, with the shutter button release, it definitely gets better. Having an extra height when you're pressing the shutter, more surface to feel it, will give you more control and overall make a better experience while you're out there shooting. And finally, the last accessory that I would recommend when purchasing your X-T5 and setting it up for photography is an extra battery. Of course, the X-T5 has great battery life, but you're always better safe than sorry, right? If you're only doing photography, 2 batteries should last you more than a day, no problem with that. So I would recommend to have this simple setup, 2 batteries, a wrist strap, and a simple shutter button release, and overall this setup will just make your experience with the X-T5 better. Now let's move on to the settings that I use on the Fujifilm X-T5 for photography. What I want you to do is first press the menu button here and go to the first tab, which is the image quality setting. The image quality sets to Fine plus RAW. Fine plus RAW means that you will shoot both JPEG and RAW images, which can be useful if you want to quickly share some information or some pictures with your friends or your clients, but that also gives you the flexibility to edit with RAW later. When it comes to RAW recording, I set it to uncompressed because I don't want to have my RAW image compressed, and the X-T5 has enough buffer and is fast enough to usually satisfy all my needs when it comes to burst. Also, from the X-T5, you have the possibility to select HEIF, which is basically like JPEG, but more compressed and with the same amount of information. But for the moment, for my workflow, I usually set it up to JPEG. It's easier to share it everywhere. And that's pretty much it when it comes to the image quality tab. Moving on to the AF/MF setting, there's not much to do here. What I would advise you to do is to first set the AF plus MF on. This is basically when you shoot in manual focus to still have access to the autofocus when pressing the AF on. When it comes to the MF assist, I usually set it to focus peak highlight. This basically means that whatever you capture in your image that is in focus will basically appear in red. And this is how this will help you maintain focus within your frame. And finally, the touchscreen mode, I usually set it to AF. By default it's touch shooting, but I don't really like it, so I just set it to AF, and if I want to quickly focus on a part of my composition, I just tap it on my screen. Alright, so now let's move all the way down to our setup. So first, in the sound setup, what I would do is that I would put the autofocus beep volume to off. Now, this is just a personal preference, but I just don't like it whenever I focus that to have the beep 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 beep. I just don't like it. So I just turn it off. Then when it comes to the screen setup, I like to have my EVF brightness to +1. This is basically, I found out that when I'm outside, I feel like the default setting is a little bit not enough for me to have enough visibility of what I want to capture. I usually set it to EVF brightness to +1. I let the colors, the brightness, etc. I will do the same for the LCD, set it to +1 to have a little bit more brightness on both the EVF and the screen. Next, this is a personal preference, but image display, whenever I capture a picture, I want to visualize it directly. So by enabling the image display to 0.5 seconds, whenever I will press my shutter and take a picture, I will get, just after taking the picture, a preview of this picture displayed on my LCD screen. And this is quite useful if you want to make sure that everything that you want is in focus or that you are not missing anything in your composition. I think that's a feature that I like having. Another interesting feature is the electronic level setting. This is by default to off, but I like having the 2D, which is basically, it's going to give you the level on your screen. So for example, I'm going to show you right now. Now, if we go to button dial setting, when it comes to shutter AF, I like to have the AF single off. And the reason for that is that I use back button focus whenever I go for photography. Now, I made an entire video on this and you can click on the little card right here to check it. But basically it allows you to decouple the focus from your shutter button and have more control on whenever you want to focus. So if you're into trying the back button focus, I would recommend you to set the AFS to off. Now, this is quite important and I don't really know why it's not by default to on. But by default, this is to off. I want you to put the shoot without the lens option to on. This will allow you to use manual lenses that don't communicate with your camera and to be able to take pictures with them. If you do not set that to on, you will not be able to capture any picture. Another option that is by default to, in my opinion, the wrong value is to shoot without card. By default is to on, but I would suggest you to put it to off. And this will allow you to basically not make the mistakes of thinking that you have a memory card in your camera, shooting some pictures, and then realizing that there was nothing there and that you are not recording anything. So set this to off and make sure that it stays that way. And finally, we are going to move to the custom setting that I assign to each of my buttons. So to check those settings, I want you to press this button for a long time. And you should see this menu right here. Long story short, I will assign this button right here on the top of the Fujifilm camera to the eye autofocus detection, this button in the front to the object detection so that I can turn it on and off, this button right here to the AF modes. Here, this button is by default to the film simulation. This button, I'll leave it by default to the white balance. This button here, because I do product photography also, I like to have it to self-timer. That way I can directly enable my self-timer real quick. I don't really use the scroll up, scroll down, scroll left, scroll right functions on the screen, so I left them the way they are, but honestly I don't use them. I mostly shoot in manual exposure, so I don't use much the AEL either, but I use the AF on button for back button focus. The way we work is that I will then have my focus button here, and here I will just press the shutter. This dial here, I like pressing it to be able to zoom within my picture. And the view mode, now that you have the possibility to customize it, is great, but I still want to be able to switch view mode right here, so I leave it that way. Alright, so let me know if you have any questions about those settings, if you agree or disagree with them, and if you have any questions about the accessories that I mentioned before. And if you've missed it, check out this video right here where I take you to the streets of Tokyo for a night street photography session with the X-T5. See you there.